that are tuned in to the festival of storytellers.com. They're probably watching us right now. And I'm sure we have viewers on YouTube as well. This goes around the globe, and we'd like to greet everyone. And welcome everyone to this segment of Author of the Hour. And we are featuring the book of It and our author, Scott Rahn. And before anything else, I'll be introducing myself to all of our viewers out there. My name is Robert. I am with ReadersMagnet. It's my privilege and joy to be joined by Mr. Scott Rahn, our featured author, and Mr. Frank Keelan, who's also an author and is our panelist for this discussion. It's a very interesting conversation that we will be having. And I will allow both of our dear authors to introduce themselves. But before anything else, I will give Mr. Ron time to say hello and introduce himself to the rest of the world. Scott, I'll give you the stage, sir.
Hi, my name's Scott Rahn. Glad to see all of you. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever. Good evening. I'm the author of the book of It. It's kind of a strange title for a book. I realize that. It sounds like it's about everything, and I know everything, but that's not the case at all. It is actually kind of a philosophical thing that is a strand that weaves through the tapestry of history. And that's kind of what the book's about.
Thank you, Scott. You put so much of the stuff into that line right there, but I'm sure we'll start getting into the nitty-gritty of that philosophical book in our discussion, and I appreciate it. Frank, I will give you the time to say hi to our audience and introduce yourself, sir.
Hello. Okay, my name is Frank Keelan. I am happily married for 54 years to my magnificent wife, Anne, and we have 4 children, 11 grandchildren. And my education background is I'm a city person originally, certainly, New York City and Queens County, Elmhurst, and went to Xavier High School, wherever the subway took me, Fordham University, NYU, and a doctorate in educational administration from Columbia University. And then I went on to into teaching for 7 years in New York City and in Dobbs Ferry, Westchester County. And then I was superintendent of schools for 25 years in New York at Tuxedo Park School District, and then in New Jersey, Manville School District. And I'm living now, of course, for the 35 last years in Edison, New Jersey, kind of a crossroads in a sense of the Northeast, and of 100,000 people, over 100,000 people. And I was on the school board there, elected to the school board, served there 7 years, and was board president for 2 of those years. So, and my book is, you can see it, Stations of the Risen Christ, Resurrection Meditations. And it deals with the time of Jesus Christ according to the Gospels of John, Luke, and Matthew, and shows focuses on the appearances of Jesus Christ after he resurrected himself from the dead, and appeared to them for 40 days to over 500 disciples, and so it's basically a prayer book. It's simple. It's taken something from those evangelical authors, and then placing a meditation alongside it. So to get people to think about this and basically to meditate on it. Obviously, it takes faith to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and so I wanted other people to. I wanted to share that with other people, and that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. And so for all our viewers out there, we have 2 gentlemen, 2 authors who took a step back, looked at history, put some context into it, and allows us to not just look at it at a standpoint that it is history and it is what happened. We will get some sense and try to rationalize, if not truly understand and appreciate the course of time and what we can learn from it. And so, Scott, given your very brief introduction of the book of it, and I know given its contents, and you've shared earlier from our earlier conversations, this is 2 decades of research, validating and putting into it and looking into history, really. And you shared earlier that we have found that there's a common thread into it. Would it be fine, sir, if we tell our audience, in that volume of research that we have conducted, what is it that seems to be the common thread all throughout the histories that we have as a civilization?
Strangely, that's why I call it it. I really don't know a defined name for it. It was just a nickname. There it is again. Here it is. It's over here. And over time, it just evolved to be the name for it. It's a school of thought, basically. And it moves through time as surely as a religious school of thought. Sometimes it's an adversary of the religious school of thought. Sometimes it evolves to envelope the religious school of thought. But it itself doesn't change. It's just strange that way.
Very scintillating message. It is strange that way. And now our audience is starting to have a better idea of the book of it. So we never put like a taxonomy into it, right, Scott? It's just that we've been seeing these things happening all across, the generations and history. And we never really put a word into it. But if I may ask, sir, is there anything in particular about that pattern that kind of transpires and defines the course of history? Like, is there a certain segment in history which had been a good movement towards a better good, or had plunged civilization into something really awful? Is there something of that we've noticed in your research, Scott?
Several. There's, the evolution of the following of Jesus Christ into or through the Holy Roman Empire, into the Catholic Church, into what became the Inquisition for a while, the totally dominant power of the church over even royalty, who saw themselves as some kind of divine ruler of, that was entitled by God to rule their country. It's just, that's one of the more garish, and it doesn't take away from what the religion teaches. I don't want to ever present that point of view. My own mother actually asked me once about that because she's got a copy of the book. I said, no, if nothing else, regardless of what I may see of the condition of certain religions today, Christianity being one of them, they're what preserved what the original speaker had to say. And, for instance, and I'm not challenging anything, and actually, Frank, you and I could have a really interesting conversation on the topic. But if you were to take away the Son of God and Messiah parts all the way from Jesus Christ, he would still be one of the most remarkable men that ever lived in history. Sure. He's also one of him and Shakespeare, whether people know it or not, are the most quoted people in the English language. Just people never know what they're saying because we've been saying it for centuries, that those words came from those two guys.
Very interesting, Scott. I just learned something there. Shakespeare and Jesus, the most quoted that we have. And I'm starting to get a feel of what the book of it is and how Scott weaves the story. Frank, I know you got a couple of questions for Scott, and given that Scott talked about how the idea of divinity does not in whatsoever, right, water down the beauty of Jesus' message and his impact on civilization and culture, really. And given that it's also your primary topic in your book, Frank, would you want to share something to Scott or ask something to Scott in the same lines?
Well, I didn't really think of doing that, but what are your thoughts? do you have faith in Jesus Christ? I guess is one question, because that's a dividing point, of course, and that's why we probably have an interesting conversation, because I think you look upon it as historical fact. Many of it from Tacitus or whoever, but it's a gap between believers and those who would just look upon it as an interesting leader, interesting sayings that he would have. What
Right. First and foremost, I
Yeah.
believe in God.
Mhm.
It may not 100% be the God taught by religions.
Right.
Okay. Now, Jesus Christ is one of the biggest mysteries in history to me. Okay. I mean, he obviously did things that were documented, the miracles, etc., that couldn't be done.
Mhm.
Okay. He didn't just flat survive the crucifixion. I got curious enough about that I researched some into ancient Roman medicine, and that would have been impossible. Yet 3 days later, the guy's up walking around. He's doing as a physical being. Like you said, for another 40 days, people are citing him. The very priests that had him nailed to the cross are now on Pontius Pilate's butt because he didn't kill him. Well, Pontius Pilate's certain he killed him. And like I said, it makes him a great mystery. And I kind of, the Messiah, etc., I'm not sure that's what he wanted so much as a reformation.
And
One of the characters in my book, in fact, says that, it's not that he really planned to be the Godhead of an entire religion's faith. He wanted people to stop and look and see and change and actually follow what was meant to be followed.
Mhm.
But I said,
sorry, Scott, please go on, sir.
as far as the person himself, it's just, like I said, it's a mystery, because the person, or the facts state explicitly that this guy did what he did. I'm sorry if you find it slightly offensive when I keep saying this guy, Frank, but I don't have another way to describe it. Jesus did wondrous things. He did things that are impossible. I told somebody once, this is because I had read another article about somebody rationalizing one of the miracles scientifically. I said, yeah, but the thing is, you cannot get past the resurrection.
Mhm. Yeah.
There's no getting past that. Scientifically, you can't even say aliens did it, since that's got to be a popular thing. It's just something that happened.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation.
Sure.
And I'd like to think that there's a historical significance into Jesus's message as well. And I know that we're looking at it two different perspectives. We're looking at it through the strands of available history and the documents. And Frank, I know you're putting in appreciation around those things. And I think this is how conversations about our historical past should be, wherein we glean information from it. We allow it to transform into some sense that allows us to get an idea of how things should be, and probably learn from it. I'm gonna take a pause there, and I know, Frank, you got a couple of questions for Scott yourself. I'm gonna give you some time to do so, sir.
Well, you mentioned how you grew up on a Illinois farm, and how did that influence, and that you were able to understand nature and animals and how things happened and what was going to kind of come about in the future. How would you relate that? You're growing up on the Illinois farm, Scott.
Things run in cycles. The seasons, whatever, or however long it takes to raise, say, a calf to market weight. It's all, you have to be patient. You have to wait for these things to happen. Vegetables in a garden, You have to wait till it's time for them to be picked to have fresh vegetables, fruit ripening on a tree. It's all in its own time. The same thing applies to events in history. You know, something may start something coming, a change in the way people feel or whatever, but it has to grow from that seedling and root up through where it's able to reproduce and spread, if that makes sense to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good experience that I never really had. I guess another question I had was, what is symbolized by the cover of your book, with all the books on a fence? And I see it's behind you too, so you're obviously a super reader, as you have indicated, and your background in reading, you might.
The book cover itself, everything on that cover is contained inside the book in one way or another, be it metaphorically or whatever. It's kind of a strange story. We were past editing and anything, and we were putting together and gotten to the point we needed a cover illustration. And most of those items were just things I'd acquired over the years and had just thrown them on, at the time, empty library shelves. Well, as more and more books came, eventually they ended up piled in a corner of the library shelf. And that's actually how it looked, piled in that corner.
Okay.
I contacted the publishers and I said, hey, you know, what if I send you a picture of this? And I sent him a picture of that, and that ended up on the cover.
Yeah.
I think it's fairly meaningful. You know, the knowledge,
reading knowledge, right?
Fair. And so, Frank, Scott, we were talking about this earlier, right? So I think the both of you looked into history, took different perspectives onto it. And one of the things that we talked about was how things in the current times can be very different when somebody takes on the work of Scott or your work, Frank, right? When they look at the lens of history, what is news today is history tomorrow. Would it be the same way given the noise around the news that's happening, and you know the internet and the flooding of the news? And I think things have just changed from how one takes in information nowadays. Will there possibly be a difference? Will the person, say, of 50 to 100 years from now, find it more difficult to write and look and peer into history compared to how we peer into history now?
It's kind of strange. I don't think one thing is going to change, and that's what they find in history, or if they're trying to write a history, it will be still the historian's opinion. The unfortunate part is, as Frank mentioned before we went on, everything's grown so one-sided and, well, laced with things that aren't exactly true, that it's going to be next to impossible to compile something from multiple sources and multiple angles. Everything has the same angle now. It's all there. It seems to sell news or to sell, well, going to your website. And, you know, a person, for instance, can live their entire life now sheltered from any and every alternate opinion. All they have to do is choose which things to open up and read. And if they don't like that one, they'll just never go back to it. And that's what they're going to hand down to their children, etc., as the facts of the day. And it's going to make it that much harder to put together clear histories in the future, I believe.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And so are we and this is a question for the both of you, sirs. So when we talk about history, and you know, Scott, you said that, and this is the same thing you said, Frank, right? It cannot just be the one side. There has to be an alternative. There has to be a difference of opinion, and there has to be that balancing out. And so are we saying that in between that balancing out is the truth behind what really transpired, or is it in the balancing out that we make sense of what truly happened, or are we even able to capture what truly happened at one point in time?
Right. Well, I think that's he made a very very good point in saying it's so difficult because as a teacher, I always at that time in the 60s, 70s, you had to present both sides. If you didn't present both sides, you might be in trouble. And that was a good thing because I had my side, but and others had their side. But I always presented both sides. I always had to balance it out. I couldn't just let my personal feelings overwhelm myself and project this onto the students that I had in high school. So it's and now you just find as Scott has indicated, when you turn on cable news and they say the same thing on uh, CBS, NBC, or ABC. Maybe I should mention the names, but they say the same words, the same phrases, the same approach, and it's like a corporate culture that's imposed on you by Disney and Coca-Cola, I guess, and all of these other companies that own them, AT&T included, CNN, So, I mean, and you don't get the picture of both sides, whereas I have given up newspapers before because of that, because I couldn't find both sides. And I'm perfectly willing, and I lose the love to hear it, the other side, than my side. And you learn something from it. Just the whole issue of marijuana. I was talking to a son-in-law of mine, and he's like on a different side than I am. But we had a discussion, and so I changed my mind on a lot of the issues because I was entrenched in an earlier view of, oh, this is horrible criminalism, and so it's so helpful medically that he kind of opened my mind to different things. So I mean, but we can have a discussion with him. It's so great, but there's so few people that you can even have a discussion because everyone is just, this is the way it is. There's no other way, and they'll scream and yell at you, and so it's difficult even with the millennial grandson I have of mine. I avoid the issues. I try to skip around it so we won't get into a heated argument. And he's living with us, so sometimes during the pandemic it was pretty tough when we were there for 5 months and we were on different sides of the fence. And he's an excellent person, and there's so many wonderful people. But I just like to see both sides presented. And the newspapers I can't even read anymore, and I don't have any subscriptions to any newspapers. First time in my life, after so many years from college on. I had mentioned about New York Times. I used to read like the Bible in college or so, and then I went on to others because they were kind of one-sided, became one-sided, and now it's just like bought up by all the big billionaires, and they only their thoughts and can be projected, and it can't be just regular people who can just have another opinion. And there's not two columnists, one for, one against. It's just the one. So it's distorts history in the future, and it wonders. It makes you wonder where it's going to lead to in the future, when there's attempts, even in our Congress, to quiet people who have an opposite and opposing viewpoint than others. They might call it hate speech or jail you or someone else. I mean, there's that case of the girl in British Columbia, who the school was actually transforming her from a girl to be a boy, and the parents were never informed. The father objected to this and said, "This is an outrage. If you changed the chemistry of my child's body before she could even make a decision herself." And then they said, "Well, this is what your child said. It's okay, and so we're doing it." And it turned out that he kept calling his child a girl, and that was against the laws in Canada. I guess they're supposed to be a little ahead of us, in this craziness. And so, because he called his daughter a girl, he went to court. He did take it to court, and at the court, they decided that it was the girl, and if she wanted to become a boy, she could. So then he kept calling her a girl and went on viral with it. And so they said, "You stop it. We told you to stop it." And they put him in jail for 6 months and $30,000 fine because he calls his daughter a girl. And it's this issue of the transgender. And where are the rules? Where does it begin and end? What's on? Is there another opinion on this, or is another opinion allowed, or is it just a dogma of the government now?
Very, very interesting topics you've shared there, Frank. And I know some of these conversations we're having right now are a little sensitive, right? I'm sorry to weave us into this, but that's totally fine. But Scott, what's as a student of history, right? And what's your take on that? Is this part of the recurring pattern? Is the fact that what Frank shared, wherein there's not much difference of opinion that's going on, will it make it confusing for onlookers in the future to check us? And if we are supposed to learn from history, so that we don't repeat the mistakes that have been done through it, like the ones that you've shared, will it become harder for the next generation compared to this one's?
It would become impossible. Partly to Frank's point, at what point does accepting something turn into being forced to allow something? Okay, there's a big difference in the two. It's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna the race things today. Okay, in the 60s and into the 70s, when I grew up, we had a brief period where we didn't care about any of that. We thought we won the war. We were young, we were naive, we had changed segregation laws, we had all this kind of stuff. We weren't smart enough we sat back and partied, I'll be honest with you. We weren't smart enough to understand it was just a battle. It was a battle that was going on forever. Now, as far as its impact on the future, Frank's probably going to agree with me too, because he's a teacher. Once an empire starts to allow everything, it descends either total hedonism or a police state, and no empire ever has survived that in history. The worst part of that being when that empire, if it's the most influential on the planet, when it falls, it takes the known world with it, because that's where the trade was, that's where everything was. And in this case, for the first time in history, the whole planet is the known world. So yeah, there could be very devastating effects from something like that.
That requires some pondering over there, and that got me a little scared there, Scott. But yes, you do have a point. And I was looking at the synopsis of the book from your Amazon page. And by the way, for those of you on the audience right now who just joined us on stream, right, I will share to you how you can get to Frank and Scott through their website or their social media networks, or through the festivalstorytellers.com on their booths, and how you can get the copy of their book. But in the meantime, I had the privilege to check, and I found a very nice, I'd like to use the word nice for the lack of a better word here, but this last part of the line, Scott, so that another chance can be given to creation, along with a chance to finally build a truly eternal civilization and culture. And I'm putting it into context about what you said, right? That the whole world now is a known world. And although I have a vague idea of what that great empire is, but it seems like now it's not just like a Roman Empire, it's not just a Persian Empire, it's a collectiveness of individuals who support that. And when it falls, it impacts the whole thing. But is it a possibility that we can take the high road and perhaps avoid the possible future that you have shared, Scott, and truly make an eternal civilization or a society, maybe?
Yes, but we can't be forced to. We have to choose to. That's where the frustration of it comes in. Individuals, person by person, have to understand it's up to them. Since you have that quote, I put in, you're fated to the world you were born in, okay? But your destiny is to build the fate of your own future generations. That's how it is. Okay, people can decide, yeah, you could say we could save the world, but we have to learn a self-discipline, which means self-discipline, unfortunately, it's more a matter of what you choose not to do than what you choose to do in almost every case. And that's one of the things, self-discipline and respect, they're lacking. It's just the way it is now. But yeah, it can be changed. It can be changed at any time. But that's up to us. That's not up to the government. That's not up to religious leaders. That's not up to anybody else but the human individuals, person by person. And although that sounds like a tall order, I guess, Margaret Mead once said something to the effect that, it's not that one person can't change things. Okay. The fact is, everything started with the idea of one person, no matter how big the change ended up being.
Interesting. I'm going to let that sink in a bit. And what I captured there, I like that line, that we're fated to the world we're born in, but our destiny is to shape, right, the fate of the world that the next generation is going to receive. And I've always thought of it the same way, right? Like, how we manage waste, how we create the society that we are now. Does not necessarily benefit us, but it shapes, the future generations. And so if we're asked the question about where is this current generation shaping its civilization into, is it one of those moments in history, Scott, where we see the rather garish endings, or do we have the right to positively think that things are going to get better?
We have the right to possibly think things are going to get better. I mean, that's part of free will. I'm not denying it, and I'm not making a joke. It's throughout history, there's always been people for at least 1,500 years I know of saying we're on the cusp of our total destruction. We've made it this far. Sometimes we had to fight to make it this far. But we made it this far. That means we can keep going. But past choices have to be made that often are not made now, that were actually made in the past. Unfortunately, human individuals have become too self-interested. I mean, that's one of the things that COVID is pointing out to human individuals. They've gotten bored with themselves because they've been locked in their houses with only themselves for months.
I was trying to absorb all of it. Frank, do you have any questions or something to share to the rest of the audience?
No, I was just going to say I think we're all kind of narcissists when we come into the world, and we try as we go to become less narcissistic. We'll probably go out still with a great deal of selfishness and self-love, but you try to do what you can in your own life. But there's forces that I think Scott would see too, that are much broader than us, that sometimes overwhelm us and take us in a direction that we don't want to go. And it's very often a clash of civilizations, like Turgenev's Fathers and Sons that he had written, the clashes that between millennials and which are dominating today, and maybe even baby boomers, as well as sociologists call my group growing up in the 50s the lucky few, because there were so few of us, only 41 million. Now there's like 72 million and more, of the other generations, the baby boomers and the millennials. So it's going to be their world. I mean, it's their choices. It's But we can just have so much to say about it. But those patterns, as Scott would see, the movements of history going in certain directions which are not even might not even be desirable. I mean, I came from the point of view of we were in the 50s sitting on top of the world. I mean, first of all, in the 40s we had to save our uh, get the food to China. Uh, eat your food because Chinese are starving. Well, it's a little different now, and then it became the Europe. Well, first it was the Europeans, of course, because at the end of the Second World War, and then the Chinese, and things have changed so radically from those days. We were the empire. It was the American empire that was in a sense controlling the world militarily, economically, and we were using up a great deal of the goods and assets of the world. And now it's a question of sharing, and there's others that are taking their place, and other conflicts that are going on. I mean, you can see the South China Sea and these other places that are going on, and even with the Philippines, and all of the countries surrounding in the South China Sea and other places in the world, the hot spots which I don't have to go into, but we all see it all the time. And you don't know if we have the leadership and the capability to really get a path forward uh, that would be beneficial to all peoples, rather than just have a dominant force tell everybody else what to do and how they can do it. So, so
I
we lost,
agree.
we
That
lost your
was exactly the point I was making. So yeah, I obviously agree.
sure.
I'm starting to feel the weight of your experiences, right? And I'm starting to learn a lot from this session. It's like I'm being schooled back and making to think deeper than I should be. And coming from a generation, you said, right, Frank. And this is the same thing you said too, Scott. Right? We're fated to the world we were born in, and much of the things that I see nowadays are getting me scared because the conversations are always about how we're losing the oceans, how the pollution is making things worse. And these are the things that I see on the news. These are some of the things that I see that's happening. And now my opinion is shaped about how things are. I come out and I think like the world is a scarier place. It's gotten scarier from the moment I was born, day by day. And what Scott would say is that this can change, but it's not forced. It's a collective choice to do the collective good. And what you're saying, Frank, is it's brought about by a sense of responsibility around individuals back then to have a tit for tat on opinions and like really shape what could possibly be. And so this is what makes it very, very interesting. I know that I have the right to possibly think things are going to turn better, but is this part of a recurring pattern that you have noticed, Scott? And if there is a leveling, so I remember my teacher used to tell me that in arts there's learning, mastery, and decay, and when that happens, a new art form is born. Are we at the precipice of that, wherein we've gone through the learning, we're getting the mastery of it, and we're about to tip? And hopefully, and same as like what history has, at least I've learned, right? It always comes up with something new, and then we go through the cycle again.
We do and we don't. I mean, I'm going to use one of the examples used. You word about pollution. Okay, up until 1968 or so, when I was growing up, smoking chimneys on factories were seen as a sign of prosperity. We had no concept we were destroying the world. It was, it was not anything anybody ever considered. Now you're probably 2 years or generations younger than me. To you, this is common knowledge. We have to change something or we're going to destroy the world. All right. Where during those two generations, unfortunately, it took a lot of the industry with it, but we worked to clean up that well, one case in point, because it took a very large debate in Washington, lead used to be in everything. They've known since ancient Rome, lead will make you crazy and it will kill you. And that fight, well, we kind of won it, outside of, well, water pipes and infrastructure that would cost a fortune to replace. So people ignore replacing them in the older parts of cities. But we don't use lead in everything from paints to boots to, right, you know, we've learned better. We've learned there are chemicals in the smoke coming out of factory smokestacks we shouldn't be breathing in. So we've made it stop. And like I said, this part of the destiny thing, you know, you're part of that fate I mentioned. You're 2 generations younger than me. We've given you this. Now it's going to be your turn to run with it. Okay. I'm not afraid to admit I'm becoming an old man. In fact, I'm old enough to be a great grandfather now. It's going to be over for me soon, for lack of a less subtle way to put it. It's going to be your world. It's going to be your choice. I mean, what I put in the book of it, whether it's guidance, philosophy, it's more of a, hey, open your eyes. This may well be what you need. If it's not what you think you need, it's going to certainly become what somebody else needs someday.
It's a sobering statement that you get. I had to find my footing there, Scott. I'm going to spread that responsibility out there to the rest of the folks who are in my generation and the generations younger than me. And I like how you put it, right? We look at different perspectives, we welcome new ideas, and we progress towards what's good for all of us. And I'm hoping that, you know, this generation that we have does the same and really work towards, you know, having the next generation inherit a better place. I'm gonna lay low on the you know, the heavy topics and segue really quick into some of the light side. Scott, you've mentioned that this is a collective knowledge and research that you've done as a hobby, starting from your habit of reading. Took 2 decades, actually. If there is any particular any particular message out of that collection that you want to share to our viewers, or something that you would like them to find on the pages out of those 20 years of research and many, many years of collected histories, what would that be, sir?
Basically, I'd like people to read the book, and, well, I like paper books because you can make margin notes. Make margin notes. Go out and look for yourself. Find out that what's in that book, or go somewhere and where there's a reference and figure out what the metaphors mean. I mean, that's part of the riddle of it, you know, is knowing how to understand the ancient forms of writing, or, well, the paraphrases, the metaphors, the puzzles, the riddles that never end. They won't end. That's part of what life is. And it may not go the way you want. It may be, like you said, sobering, etc. But you have to take a look at it, because that's what's out there. Okay, and you have to learn on your own much more than from a book. It's about the things that I've said before, you know, self-discipline being first and foremost, acceptance that everybody actually wants the same thing. You know, it's not a matter of religion or political at all. You know, it's not a matter of the governments. It's up to us as individuals wandering this planet to want to stand up. You know, for instance, America is unique, even though everybody ignores it. Those people in Washington, they're not our leaders. That's what everybody keeps saying. Okay? They're not our leaders. They're our representatives. We employ them. One of the things from, well, passed away several years ago now, but those 50 stars on the flag that you're taught represent the 50 states. Okay, the star that represents your state represents you. Every person in that state. We have the only flag in the entire world that actually has meaning. The rest of them are symbols or whatever, but the American flag, there's meaning to those things. And if you want to hold on to it, then you have to accept that you have to get up and do things.
Thank you, sir. It's about knowing thyself. I think it's a Descartes statement, right? We have to know ourselves, and at the same time, in that microcosm, we understand that our actions ripple. They make an effect, and if we're talking about the context of the American flag, that we are what makes that place, and it is our actions that will ripple through time. And I think this is something that should be out there more often. That we'd rather not be talking about divisions, but ideas and context, and the conversation about identifying what is best for the rest should be happening. And I'm touching on a good point right there, because I see Frank nodding. And as an educator, I know, Frank, that that's probably one of the things that you wanted your students to always think about. And I'm starting to think this is what my generation, and maybe the next generation, would need the most. And on before I segue to anything else, Frank, anything you'd like to ask or share? I think you've got a couple of questions maybe still left for Scott.
Yeah, I have. What is your final warning as to the consequences of it?
I don't know if there is a final warning.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's just, hey, it's out there. Go look and you'll see. And, well, like I've said a couple times in the last 15 minutes, it's kind of up to you. You know, you have to stand up and say, hey, you know, this guy's right. Or, hey, I found out, you know, there's something going on. There's the future is there, you know, because Frank mentioned you mentioned there's powers bigger than us. Mm-hmm. Has anybody else noticed that a lot of these powers are making their money and their power exists by promoting dividing us?
Right.
I mean, we have to unite. We have to choose to pull together. That's a major part of its continuation. I don't think it would end if humanity ended. It goes on. It's always been there. It's always going to be there.
I think, too, I just mentioned that things have gotten a lot better since I've been alive. And hopefully they continue to get better with a lot of terrific, young people that are on the horizon in the millennial group who are forging ahead. I mean, when you look at the world, how it had been, it was kind of the United States sitting on top back in the 50s, and everyone else, including blacks, hadn't received their rights yet. They finally did in the 60s. For the most part, at least, to be given a chance. And but now it's a much better world. I mean, there are not tremendous people dying in China, even though I don't agree with the government they have there. But they are being fed throughout the world. And even when I visited Europe, across Europe, and worked there in 1960, a lot of years ago, it was much poorer than it is when I've gone back since to Europe. It's very affluent and very well. And the same thing is true in many places of the world. I mean, there are poor places, of course, in Latin America, there's and certain areas of Africa, but even those have risen up beyond so much better than what was true years ago. So I think there's some good news on the horizon. I hope. We can only hope.
Hope springs eternal.
Right.
That's what they say, Frank. And I think this is about a conversation that should have happened in like probably dinner tables or on the coffee shops, right? Wherein, we take in different perspectives. And I am inviting everybody to check the book of Scott Rahn, right? The book of it. You can find it on Amazon. You can visit the festivalstorytellers.com and you can send Scott an email or get to be interactive with him once he goes live on Author of the Hour sessions or in his live broadcast. And I'm sure many of you will have questions, and you can do the same for Frank Heelan. Mr. Heelan's also on the festivalstorytellers.com. He's got his own booth, and I'm excited to invite everybody to just go and visit. And the wisdom that these authors will have is something of a self-help for me, given these conflicting and challenging times. And I think if we wanted to know the story behind the story for the rest of our audience, it's right there. There's no better way than to get it from the authors themselves. And, Frank, I'm going to segue back to what you said earlier when things are getting better. And it's comforting, right? But at the same time, Scott tempers that with an idea that there's always a balancing into things, right? There will be individuals who choose the better good, but then, Scott, please correct me if I'm wrong, sir, there will also be some instances wherein we decide in a short-sighted perspective and it turns out awry. But will there ever come a time wherein we understand that common good, maybe, and collectively as a species, right, as a culture and as a civilization, we unanimously probably say that that's a better route. Let's all take it, and it's a conscious decision that we do out of our own will and volition.
In my case, that's the major hope. Okay.
I'd like to.
I mean, you have to hope that that's all there is sometimes.
Frank, what can you say about that, sir? Will there come a time? And I'm saying this at a perspective, right? I grew up from a very religious household myself, and I may have looked at it differently back then when I was younger, and I'm looking at it differently right now. And definitely, when I'm looking at a historical Jesus, or when I'm looking at it through the lenses of faith, it impels me to choose a better decision, right? And I'm looking at the history of some of the religious tenets that we've had, even philosophy. It always tells us to do the better choice. And so what Scott was saying in a rational perspective is we can hope for so. And Frank, what you were sharing earlier is that we should be feeling, given your experience, sir, some things are getting better.
Right. I think there is the hope. I mean, coming from a faith perspective, I consider God to be in control. It's not human beings. We are also so stuffed up with ourselves and possessions and everything else that we don't even realize that it isn't us. I think it's God that made those vegetables grow, Scott, even in the farm, and they didn't grow by themselves. And I think that He's in control of the world, and there's certainly a lot in Scripture, and I would plumb the depths of the Scripture as much as I can, or as little time as I have left, to find out. And that's why I find great hope in the resurrection of Christ. That yes, there's hardships and there's the crosses and everything to bear while you're on this earth, and we've all seen horrible things happening and suffering and everything else. But beyond it and beyond death, there is the hope of the resurrection, which Christ has promised. And as a believer that He is God, the Son of God, that there is that hope of the second coming of Jesus Christ, actually, and to take command of history.
Thank you very much, Frank. Scott, I don't think I have questions left relating to the story of the book, although I have many questions that's lingering on my head. right now, and same goes for Frank as well. This has been a very interesting conversation. We're almost at the top of the hour, and I would just like Scott to, communicate to his readers or to his audience, or any message that you would like to share, sir. It could be about the book. Most important part is this is a festival of storytellers. We want to know more about the story behind the story, and so I will give you the stage, sir, to speak to our audience and those viewing us from around the globe.
Well, what you just said, you have questions. That's kind of the object of the book. To open the mind up to the idea there's more out there than what you've been taught to see, led to see, whatever you want to say. You need to go out and look. You need to find out. There's wonderful things out there. I don't want to sound like I was a doomsayer before, because I wasn't. That hope thing's a big deal with me. In fact, that was the last thing to come out of Pandora's box. It's not that I believe humanity is terminal. I believe that humanity has a chance to get to have a chance. Okay? If I'm wrong and there is a giant conspiracy, humanity deserves better than to be bait in some sort of cosmic hunt, or whatever you want to call it, existential hunt. It's not. I'm part of humanity. There's people in humanity I love dearly. Some I don't care about so much, I'll be honest, but there's a lot to be said. We may be the people that developed the atomic bomb, but we're also the people that wrote Mozart and painted great works, carved Michelangelo's David, built. There's just so much we have to offer to ourselves, and that can go off into the future. Certain digital art forms fascinate me. I grew up during the age when the electric guitar and all of that was new, and in the 60s music, basically everything was experimental. There's so much creativity in humans, and so much ability to do if they set their mind to it. After all, I published a book. And that's why I say I have hope. Humanity is pretty good under great stress of seeing what humanity is capable of. They really are. They always have been.
Thank you very much, Scott. Frank, you've been a very pivotal part in this conversation. I know the genres and the topics may not be very the same, but the opinion and the conversation had been very, very meaningful. Sir, I'm going to give you some time to just, share your message to our viewers as well.
My message.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's I think I've said pretty much what I wanted. It's Christ is at the center of it, and certainly we. I don't have many more years to live in my 80s, but I have the hope of the resurrection after death too, because it's something none of us are going to avoid, as we well know, and so I'm not fearful of death. I did get my shots for the pandemic, but I'm not that fearful of death and what comes after death. To me, it's like a rebirth that's going to occur. We had the original birth, and then we'll have another birth, and I believe that I'll see my Savior, and that that I will also have a body like angels, as Christ has told us that we were going to have. So,
thank you very much, Frank.
Sure.
Mr. Rahn, Mr. Heelan, it has been a privilege and a pleasure to have spent this segment of the Author of the Hour with the both of you. I have learned so much, and I'm sure our audiences as well. I'm sure your readers will benefit much from the insight and the knowledge that you'll be sharing to them. And so I'm inviting everybody to join us at the festival of storytellers.com. You can check Mr. Rahn's booth, connect with him, get a copy of his book. Same goes for Mr. Heelan. And I'm encouraging everybody to get the story straight from the storyteller. Visit us as well at ReadersMagnet.com or follow our YouTube for another preview of this discussion if you can't have enough of it, because I definitely will not. And so from all of us here, in behalf of Scott, Frank, and Readers Magnet, thank you very much for joining us. You all have a beautiful day ahead, and let's keep that hope that things are going to get better. And this is me signing off for now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Good.
Thanks a lot.
All the best.
Been wonderful. Yeah.